the non-local realm, and there's the past and the future is available.
Exactly.
So in near-death experience, you can have future events as well, personal events, or also events of the world, of the planet as well. You can perceive
And
it.
those would be verifiable if they were written down, right? They would be.
And it happens. People have written down what they saw in the future for themselves or for the family, and then later they could rip it off everything what happens then later. So
check off the list.
Check off the list. Yeah.
Yeah. Welcome to Caritas Consciousness Project. I'm Gloria Coelho, and Caritas is dedicated to promoting the evolution of consciousness as the key to individual growth and global healing. We draw from a wide assortment of both ancient wisdom and leading-edge studies in science, consciousness, spirituality, philosophy, healing. And in addition to our online presentations with guest speakers, we offer classes and study groups also online since the pandemic. There are well over 100 video recordings on our YouTube channel, which is Caritas Consciousness Project, and you can also access them and see all our speakers on our website, which is caritascenter.org. As a nonprofit organization, we rely on the support of our members and donors to keep Caritas going. So if you'd like to support our program, you can make a donation or become a member on our website. And now let me introduce today's guest speaker. I got that. Okay. Dr. Pim van Lommel worked from 1977 to 2003 as a cardiologist in Hospital Rijnstate. I don't know if I said that right.
Rijnstate.
Rijnstate.
Oh, that's it.
Okay. I used to speak German. I grew up speaking German, but
it's different from
not Dutch. It's very different from Dutch. An 800-bed teaching hospital in Arnhem, the Netherlands, and is now doing full-time research on the mind-brain relation. He published several articles on cardiology, but since he started his research on near-death experiences in survivors of cardiac arrest in 1986, he has authored over 20 articles, most of them in Dutch. One book, which is this one here, which is really a wonderful book, very fascinating. He has authored, and contributed many chapters about near-death experience in other books. And by the way, this book is called Consciousness Beyond Life, The Science of the Near-Death Experience. He was co-founder of the Dutch International Association of Near-Death Studies. That's the part of the International Association of Near-Death Studies, which those of you who are in Boulder are probably familiar with. There's a chapter there. And that was in 1988. In 2005, he was granted the Dr. Bruce Greyson Research Award of IANDS. That's the IANDS is the International Association for Near-Death Studies. In 2006, the president of India rewarded him the Lifetime Achievement Award at the World Congress on Clinical and Preventive Cardiology in New Delhi. In 2017, he received the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Award by the Dutch Society of Volunteers in Palliative and Terminal Care. In 2020, the Spiritual Awakenings International, or SAI, honored him for his groundbreaking work about near-death experiences as Circle of Honor honoree. He also won an award from the Bigelow Institute for Consciousness Studies, started in 2021 in an international essay contest for the best scientific evidence about a possible afterlife. With his article entitled The Continuity of Consciousness, he won second prize. In 2022, he became an honorary member of the Scientific and Medical Network. That's, I can't think of his name right now. Oh dear.
Lorimer?
Sorry?
David Lorimer?
Yes. He was one of my guests maybe about a year ago. Yeah, he's wonderful. I loved his book too. In 2024, he received the Eclobi, that right?
Eclobi, yeah.
Eclobi Award, Premio Somos Alma, by the Eclobi Foundation in Barcelona for his scientific research and his contribution to science. And in Madrid, he received the Social Reformer Award by Anoche Tuve un Sueño, which means this last night I had a dream, for his scientific career in demonstrating the existence of consciousness beyond the body in near-death experience. So I'll be referring, and I think both of us will be referring to near-death experience as NDE, just for short. And so welcome. I am so happy that you are with us today to talk about this wonderful subject. And I'd like to start with having you just, it's my understanding that most cardiologists don't take NDEs seriously. Would you tell us how you became interested in NDEs and why, unlike most doctors and mainstream scientists, you decided to take this experience seriously enough to research it?
Well, the first time I heard about the near-death experience at the time that this terminology did not exist anymore, because only in 1975 the book by Raymond Moody came out, Life After Life, and he used the term near-death experience. But in 1969, we just had the first coronary care units in the Netherlands, like also in the USA, because from that moment it was possible to do CPR to patients with cardiac arrest. The electrical defibrillation had become possible and external chest compression had been possible. Until 1967, all patients with a cardiac arrest died. So that's why we started coronary care unit. I worked in the second coronary care unit in the Netherlands in a teaching hospital. And so we had a patient of 44 years old who had a cardiac arrest due to a myocardial infarction, and we started to do CPR. You have to do it as soon as possible. And I think he had about 4 times defibrillation. Then after 4 minutes, he regained consciousness, and we were very happy as a resuscitation team. It was all new for us. I was the doctor in charge. But the patient was extremely disappointed. And he told me about a tunnel, about light, about music, about landscape, etc. And I never forgot this event, but I had just started my specialization in cardiology. I had a young family with young children. So I just went into it until in 1986, I read the book by George Ritchie, Return from Tomorrow, which is a wonderful book. And George Ritchie died in 1943 as a medical student because of double pneumonia. There were not antibiotics available for this medical student. So he died. His body was covered with a sheet. And the nurse was so upset that this young man had died that he was able to persuade the medical doctor there to give him an injection of adrenaline right into his heart, which was quite uncommon. And after having been dead for 9 minutes, he came back, he regained consciousness. And he had a very deep and very impressive near-death experience. Also dark spaces, but also remote view. He was somewhere else in out-of-body experiences, hundreds of miles away, and later he went to this place to see if it was all right that he had been there. So I was very impressed by his story. And he landed in 44 in Normandy and went one of the first people in concentration camps, what he told about it, and also about the power of love. I was very impressed by it. And that's where the moment I was started to ask patients who had survived the cardiac arrest if they had memories from the period of unconsciousness. And within 2 years, from 86 to 88, I had 50 patients I had asked about their possible memories of the period of unconsciousness because of cardiac arrest. And 12 of those patients shared the NDE with me. And that's how my scientific curiosity started to grow, because I had always learned that consciousness is a product of brain function. That's what we learn at schools, that's what we learn in medical school, and still people learn it. But if it was true that it was not possible that people have this kind of experiences, because in cardiac arrest, and I can explain it later, the brain function stops, the heart function stops, there's no blood pressure, no pulse, people are unconscious.
No oxygen to the brain.
There's no oxygen to the brain. So because of the finding that 12 out of 50 patients had this kind of experiences, and there had always only been retrospective studies. And that was also a moment that I read the book by Raymond Moody and others. I started to read other publications about near-death. Then we started in 88, our Dutch prospective study in survivors of cardiac arrest.
Would you explain the difference between a retrospective study and a prospective study, which is what you did?
Yeah, well, a retrospective study is that you get samples from all over the place, that you put an advertisement, you give a lecture, you ask people to tell a story. So you have a high selection of people who come into this study. When people, and I know that most people with a near-death don't talk about the NDE or are not able to talk about it, they have no words for it because it's an ineffable experience. So you don't have a really objective insight in what is really happening in NDE. But based on these retrospective studies, people thought it was just anoxia, lack of oxygen in the brain, or neurotransmitters, or hallucinations, or side effects of drugs, whatever. Just trying to be very interesting, etc. But it's never been really a scientific study. And that is why we started a prospective study, that you have to start with the patients who survive a cardiac arrest, and you find everything about the medical condition. Where you have, in a retrospective study, people said 20 years ago I had a cardiac arrest. You don't know exactly what has happened. Yeah. We had cardiac arrest patients, and we had the ECG, the electrocardiogram, we had the medication they got, have how many times the defibrillation was used, how many minutes the cardiac arrest was, how many minutes the duration of unconsciousness was. So we had a lot of information about the patients. And we did, so in 10 Dutch hospitals, we did this study, and we've had in 4 years, we had 344 survivors of cardiac arrest. And then we had a second part of the study, was a longitudinal study with taped interview of all patients who had survived the cardiac arrest. And we asked them about the transformation. And we asked them in 2 years and 8 years after the cardiac arrest. But I'll explain that later. But first, the prospective study. What we found, to our surprise, we found 18% of the patients who survived the cardiac arrest reported a near-death experience, and 82% did not report any memories of the period of unconsciousness. And when we compare the two groups, with and without a near-death experience, there was no difference at all. No difference in the duration of cardiac arrest. If they had 3 minutes or 8 minutes cardiac arrest, didn't matter at all. The duration of unconsciousness, if they had 5 minutes unconscious or 3 weeks in coma, it didn't matter at all. We have a cardiac arrest in the cath lab because of rhythm research. They usually are resuscitation within 30 seconds. Doesn't matter at all. A complicated CPR with the need of intubation. Didn't matter at all. So we could exclude the lack of oxygen in the brain as an explanation for having an NDE, which is very important. But we could also exclude that The medication was given didn't matter at all. Psychological explanation, the fear of death before the arrest didn't matter at all. Gender didn't matter at all. Religion didn't matter at all. If they were atheist or religious or Christian or Muslim, didn't matter at all. Education didn't matter at all. So the main finding of this prospective study was that there was no scientific explanation why only 80% of those patients with cardiac arrest had an NDE, and we could exclude all the, until that time, given possible explanations based on retrospective studies.
Mm-hmm.
And the second study, longitudinal study, is to see if the transformation people talk about is due to the cardiac arrest or due to the death experience. Because the classical transformation after the death experience, they lose the fear of death. They're convinced that there is continuity of consciousness. Second is the new insight that what's important is life. It's about unconditional love and compassion, first towards yourself, and then towards others and towards nature. So you are connected forever with everybody else and with nature, with plants and animals as well. And the third aspect that people are usually reluctant to talk about is the enhanced intuitive sensitivity. They know what other people think and feel.
Paranormal faculties are sometimes...
I never use the word paranormal.
Yeah.
It's normal when you have a better scientific basis for it. So paranormal doesn't exist. It's normal, but you have a different kind of science. It's normal.
That's true.
Totally normal. So many people have this kind of experiences, and it is normal.
Yes, yes.
And then what we found that only patients with a near-death experience had this classical transformation. And this is, it was statistical significant. This is the objective proof for the subjective experience, which an NDE is.
Mm-hmm.
So the problem with the current material science is that only that is true what you can objectify, what you can measure, what you can duplicate, what you can falsify. Now the problem is that consciousness, that what you feel and what you think, the essence of who you are, you cannot objectify, you cannot measure, you cannot duplicate, you cannot falsify. So what we feel inside, what we think inside, is beyond the current materialist science. And that's why a lot of materialist science have a problem with the NDE, because they never prove an assumption that consciousness is a product of brain function should be discussed now. And they don't want to do it. They're frightened.
Mm-hmm. You can't measure it.
No, exactly. So this study was published in The Lancet, one of the most important medical students, in 2001. And it was a wild worldwide stir. It was on the front page of all journals all over the world. And,
The Lancet,
yeah. So then I had already done a lot of lectures and radio and television programs, etc. But then it started to give a lot of lectures all over the world. And then my book came out in Holland in 2007. And now it's with 11 languages translated, and there's been more than 400,000 copies sold worldwide. In Holland only, it's the 31 print with more than 155,000 copies just in Holland.
Yeah, so 400,000 worldwide, right? Yeah.
With a lot of languages. So like English,
countries.
but also French and German and Spanish and Italian and Polish, but also Russian and Chinese, etc. So a lot of people can read it.
Yeah. So talk a little bit more about some of the objections, like, for instance, it's because of lack of oxygen to the brain causing, or medication causing hallucinations, or and also the other objections that we hear about and we read about, which your research has pretty much disproven. right? Empirically.
It's quite clear that we have proven, statistically proven, that all these suppositions, ideas about the possible explanation of NDEs are wrong. That's what we found in our study. That's clear. And then, so what happens in the body and the brain when there's cardiac arrest? We know it from some studies with induced cardiac arrest in patients who got an ICD, but also in animal studies. Then you see within 1 second the blood flow to the brain, which you can measure by the carotid artery, stops totally. There's no blood flow to the brain within 1 second. They lose consciousness within 2 or 3 seconds. And then the body has no body reflexes anymore, which is the function of the cortex of the brain. And the brainstem reflexes are gone. So the gag reflex, you can put a finger in someone's, and the pupils don't react to light, and the corneal reflex are gone. So there's also the brain function has gone, and the heating center, the breathing center close to the brainstem stops. So there's apnea, the people don't breathe anymore. And when you have an EEG measured, what they did in the induced cardiac arrest studies by ICDs, but you also saw it in some patients who had surgery with EEG monitoring, and they had a complication like cardiac arrest of a lot of blood. Then you see the EEG flatlines within 10 to 20 seconds. So also the electric activity in the brain has gone. So the clinical findings are there's no brain function at all. The cortex brainstem don't function anymore. And the electric activity is gone as well. So at this very moment, we know it from out-of-body experiences, at this very moment, people have this out-of-body experiences and have these near-death experiences, which should be impossible based on the never proven assumption that.
And the prospective study, included verifiable reports on the part of the patient of, I saw who was trying to resuscitate me. I heard this conversation. They were playing this music. Those are verifiable. Sorry?
There are a lot of stories. And there has recently now a book out, The Self Does Not Die, which is published by IANDS. And there are 128 cases with corroboration of critical perceptions during near-death experiences. And it is very impressive. But also in our study, we had what we call the case of the dentures. There was a man of about 40 years old who was found in a meadow unconscious.
Of the dentures, yes. There's a story, yeah.
And so he was brought into a hospital, and his body was already cold and blue, and he didn't breathe. There was no blood pressure, no pulse, his pupils didn't react to light. So he was about a corpse already. And the nurse who was in charge started to intubate the patient to give him more oxygen. And he found out he had dentures in his mouth, so he took out the dentures and put it somewhere on the crash cart. And it took 1.5 hours, which is quite long, before patient had blood pressure and heart rhythm again. But he was still unconscious, was intubated. And so he was transferred to the intensive care unit for artificial respiration for another week until he regained consciousness. And then he was back on the cardiac ward. And the moment he was there back, the nurse came in for medication. He saw the nurse and said, "You know where my dentures are." And the nurse was flabbergasted, and he said, "Yeah, you were there when I was brought into a hospital. And you took my dentures out. You put it on a car with all those bottles on there. There was a sliding underneath. And there you've put my teeth." And you could explain everything, what happens in this resuscitation room, where he was brought in coma.
Yeah.
Entered this resuscitation room. He could perceive from above what happened. He could recognize the doctors and nurses who were busy with their CPR. And he was left in coma, this resuscitation room, to this ICU, and he still was able to describe everything what happened. So this is a kind of objective proof for this.
Yeah. So he recognized the nurse who had put his dentures in the drawer of the crash cart.
Yeah, it was flabbergasted.
Yeah, she was flabbergasted. It's a great story. Tell the story about the man who met the loving stranger
Okay, okay. Yeah. There's also, so there was a man who had a near-death experience, and then he met, so you can, in a near-death experience, there are several elements that can people have, about 12, but not everybody has all these elements. But the first of thing is, you have the idea, I'm now dying, is the death. Then sometimes they hear a noise or a sound. Then they have the out-of-body experience, and they can perceive from above their own resuscitation of their own surgery, from pushing out and above the lifeless body. Then they come into a dark space, which can be frightening as well. And then you see a small light where they're attracted to. They call it usually a tunnel. Then they come in an otherworldly dimension with other beautiful landscape, beautiful colors, beautiful music. Then they can meet deceased relatives that they can communicate with. And they meet a being of light. Usually they call it Jesus. And they have a feeling of unconditional love and acceptance. And then at that very moment, they relive their whole life, a life review. It means that everything you had said, you have done, and what you have thought is kept forever. And you're back in your life, in your body, what happens before. Let's say you took some play thing from your little sister, you know how sad she was. So you're connected with the consciousness of others as well. So it's a life review, but also a learning experience as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes you come to a border, like a mist or a mountain, and then they know, when I pass this border, I will never come back. And then usually you hear a voice, it's not your time yet, you have another task to fulfill, and then they have a conscious return into the body. These are all the elements, but usually most people have not all these elements. But what you ask about meeting someone during a near-death experience was a man who met his deceased grandmother, and a man he didn't know, but looked at him lovingly. And 10 years later, at the deathbed of his mother confessed to him that he was born out of an extramarital relationship, being a father of a Jewish man who was taken by the German and murdered by the German. And his mother showed a picture. And the man he had seen 10 years before, and then he turned out to be his biological father.
Yeah.
I
love that story. Yeah.
Oh, I'm always impressed by it.
Yeah. He didn't understand why this man that he saw in his near-death experience, whom he didn't know, he didn't recognize, but he was looking at him with so much love, and then later finds out that it was his biological father when she shows him the picture.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's a great story. So most of our viewers are familiar with the reports of people who have had NDEs and the classic experiences that you mentioned, the tunnel, the life review, the light, meeting deceased loved ones and beings of light, and overwhelming sense of unconditional love and acceptance. And the reluctance of the experiencer to return to their resuscitating body. And one of the things I hadn't thought much about is the struggle to integrate this experience when the person returns to their normal life and their family. Talk about this issue and its ramifications. I thought that was really very important.
But the first thing is when they have the conscious return into the body, have the feeling that their conscious is so widened that they don't fix anymore in this body. When they come into the body, they have, again, all the implications of their traffic accident with all the bones broken or with the pain of the myocardial infarction. And they have this kind of impressive experience and they don't know what it was. And they try to talk about it with the doctor or the nurse or family members. And they all say, oh, this is total nonsense. This is a hallucination. Here you got some medication. It will go over. So when they first try to share it with others, people don't listen. And they don't know what happened. They think I was crazy or what would happen to me. And it's so hard because it's an ineffable experience. And it takes years to find out that it has a name, it's a near-death experience. You're not the only one. But the first years after a near-death experience is what I call a spiritual trauma. There's loneliness, there's depression, and homesickness until they see a film or read a book or talk to someone who had a near-death experience. And then they know, I'm not crazy, I'm not the only one. And then they can start to accept the experience. It will take many years. And when they have accepted the experience, then they have to get to integrate the experience, but it takes another many years. And when you have integrated the experience, you change the way you live. You change the way you live because of the insight you have now about what is important in life. So it's a spiritual trauma. The content is usually beautiful, but being back at the body is very, very hard.
Yeah. And how important it is, you when we were talking prior to starting the program, you mentioned that there are more and more scientists and physicians who are accepting this now, who are accepting the evidence, and so wouldn't it be wonderful if more medical staff could be trained in explaining these things, not just to the person who experienced the near-death experience, but to their families, to their loved ones, so that they can know that this person wasn't hallucinating, wasn't, that this is an experience that many people have.
It happens a lot. I've been giving lectures to medical students in medical schools, to universities, to hospitals, nursing schools, whatever. And IANDS is doing the same also in the USA. But still a lot of people are not interested in, so they don't come to such a lecture as well. I think one of the most important things is that there are more and more YouTube films and documentaries about the death experience, but it's more easy to watch and to start to think about it. But when you're not interested, you won't look, you won't read, and you won't see it.
Right. They're afraid.
And it is still because what we learn, what I told you before, on schools and medical schools and university, that consciousness promotes the brain function, then this experience should be impossible. And most neuroscientists are still looking in the brain to look somewhere to find consciousness, but they will never find. And those scientists are dependent of the research money and dependent of the positions they have. So I know some scientists who tell me personally, you could be right, but officially they say this is total nonsense until they retire. And then they tell other people, I could have been wrong my whole life. But people are so frightened to lose their credibility in the position in university when they start to be open, especially in universities. Right. So they're frightened. And I understand it.
Yeah.
I understand
it totally threatens the idea that
you lose the ground where you were living on.
Yeah. It threatens the idea that consciousness is produced by the brain, which is, as you said, is still being taught in medical schools. So which this completely, if consciousness were produced by the brain, we could not have near-death experiences when the brain isn't working. Exactly. Yeah.
So it's changing. Let's say the consciousness study, there's a Journal of Consciousness Studies, and 50 years ago it was 80% material-based consciousness studies, and now it's about 60-70% post-materialist-based. That means that consciousness is always there. It's not produced by the brain. It's beyond time, beyond space. That's what we learn from people with an NDE. There's no beginning, no end to consciousness.
But there are levels. So you have the waking consciousness, which is kind of dependent on the body, and then And then the non-local, what you call non-local consciousness. Would you talk about the difference there?
That's what I wanted to explain to you.
Okay. Sorry.
So the consciousness is over there inside and outside your body.
Yeah.
Usually you don't have access to this non-local consciousness, beyond time, beyond space. Everything is connected. And we have had here the near-death experience. You're always connected with this non-local consciousness. You feel connected with everybody else, with nature, with planet Earth, etc. But your brain functions and your body functions as an interface or transceiver. So your body and senses send information to your consciousness, and your body and brain receive information from your consciousness. And what you receive in your body is your waking consciousness, just a small part of this non-local consciousness, and just a small part of all the memories you have. When you have a near-death experience, you have memories from early childhood, sometimes even before birth. So everything is always there, but not available. I always ask patients also, where is your consciousness when you're asleep? Of course, there's consciousness, but you don't have it in your, there's no waking consciousness. When you have a general anesthesia, you don't experience consciousness, but there's always consciousness. And when you have complications of surgery, cardiac arrest, loss of blood, then you can have a near-death experience, even you have had general anesthesia as well, because you're out of your body. It's not dependent of your body, this kind of experience. So it's, and so for me, consciousness has been there always. It's fundamental in the universe. It starts with consciousness together with information and energy. Everything what we can see in the material world and the material universe comes from consciousness. Our body comes from consciousness. Everything what we see is based on consciousness. That's what we call the fundamental aspect. And the last 10, 20 years, more and more cognitive scientists are open for this possibility. So it's changing, and that's what we call the post-materialist science. That means we expand current materialist science with subjective experiences. It has to be all included. And that's what we call the post-materialist science.
Yeah. Kierkegaard, philosopher Kierkegaard, said, there are two ways to be fooled. One is to believe what isn't true. The other is to refuse to believe what is true. And if consciousness were dependent on the brain, then removing part of the brain would impact the ability to function and to think. But there are two stories in your book of patients who, there was the little girl and there was the man whose brain was filled with cancer, right? Could you talk about those? Because I think they illustrate the fact that consciousness cannot be dependent on the brain, I would think.
Well, there are some cases also in my book about patients who had more fluid, more water in their skull than brain. Yes. The brain was just 3-4 millimeters, and the rest was water. Yeah. And he had IQ from 128, and he had a PhD in whatever. So that could be impossible when the brain was producing consciousness. And there was a little girl who had intractable epilepsy, and they took half of the brain out. And within 1 year, she could walk and talk, and she could speak 2 languages because she came from Turkey. Her parents came from Turkey. So within 1 year, one half of the brain took over the function of the whole brain as well. It's what we call neuroplasticity. We all have neuroplasticity, but under the age of 5, neuroplasticity is impressive. How the brain can adapt functions as well.
Yeah. So what is there a difference between non-local consciousness and what you termed endless consciousness?
No, it's the same. So endless consciousness there's no beginning and no end.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we call non-local. And non-local consciousness also means that there's always everything connected, and it's beyond time and beyond space. So it's in its essence is the same, but non-local, it comes from quantum physics.
Yeah, it's a quantum
and so I use quantum physics as an analogy and not as an explanation for what we know about consciousness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, so to me, the brain is more of a filter, and it filters out.
That's good.
Right?
It's a filter. It's
so
an
much
filter. Yeah, everything.
filters.
But when you have the enhanced intuitive sensitivity that people have with an after and near-death experience, the filter is less, and they get much more information. What I call the non-local information exchange. They know future events. They know when someone will die. They know someone's mother died. They know that someone is ill. And they get this information not by the senses, not by the body, but just directly from the non-local consciousness exchange.
Yes.
Let's say we talked about remote viewing. I call it non-local perception.
Mm-hmm.
It's perception beyond time and space. So it's all non-local. You can access. So telepathy is also non-local information exchange. And I prefer to use scientific terminology to make it more acceptable for the general population and for scientists as well.
Mm-hmm. What should we be aware of when a loved one is in a coma?
Well, coma means that there's no waking consciousness, but there's a huge chance that they are still conscious, and they're usually not in the body, but outside the body. And there's just recently was a study done in the New England Journal of Medicine. About 25% of the patients in coma had conscious experiences. You can measure by fMRI and PET scan and EEG. So it means that when you have a patient in coma, you have to talk to him. You have to understand that they know and see what happens, that they know who is visiting them. I know patients have been in coma for months, and then when they regain consciousness, can tell everybody who came to them, what is told them, what the doctors and nurses looked like. They can see everything, but not from the position of the body, but outside the body. So talk to these patients as if they are awake, because later they can confirm that what you have said and done was seen and done and seen by them as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there was an excerpt that I wanted to read from your book, which I thought was very interesting. And it's about, well, I'll just read it. Recent studies among volunteers have found strong indications of a non-local therapeutic effect of certain drugs, such as morphine, when the substance was placed between a pulsating magnetic source and the brain. The subjective therapeutic effect in these volunteers was identical to the effect of receiving this drug directly into the body. And the same subjective therapeutic effect was achieved when the subjects drank water that had been exposed to a pulsating magnetic source, to laser light, microwaves, or even to a flashlight with the drug placed between the photon source and the water. The authors ascribed this empirically proven positive effect to quantum entanglement between nuclear spin and or electron spin in the water and nuclear spin and or electron spin in the brain. The non-local information transfer is made possible by, respectively, the magnetic, laser, or flashlight source of the microwaves. So I thought that was fascinating and could eliminate wouldn't that eliminate side effects if you could, if the drug could be administered without injection or ingestion? Wouldn't that eliminate the side effects, the possible side effects, and still be able to get the benefit?
Well, when the effect is still available, so the information is transferred directly to the brain or by water, so water can have this information stored, then
Yes.
the possibility of side effects is still there.
Oh,
Because it's the drug,
uh-huh.
the drug's information, which can
Yeah,
give
if you
side
take it
effects as
through
well.
water, but if you take it through light,
There's still, you get the information,
you're still
you get
getting
still the information of the drug, so you can have side
um,
effects. But also what healing at a distance, what you know about, is you have had studies done when there is a healer at a distance and someone 2,000 miles away has an EEG. And at random moments, the healer sends information to the patients. And you see this at random intention changes the EEG in the patients from thousands of miles away. So there's a non-local effect of the intention of the healer on a distance as well.
Yes, yes. And it's it doesn't matter how far away, it doesn't matter.
No,
time and space are not.
It's non-local.
Yeah. It's subtle energy doesn't diminish with space or time.
That's what I mean, non-local.
Yeah, what they call subtle energy. Yeah, and also in the healing work that we do. Well, we used to have a small healing clinic at our center, and where we would do the healing work in person, not at a distance. Now we just do at a distance, but the healing work that's on inpatient, part of what we do is infuse the energy into water and then have the person drink the water at the end of the session, right? So yeah, that was part of that too, that was mentioned in that passage.
What also is interesting, that patients who had a near-death experience usually have healing hands and healing power as well as distance, but their hands are also healing energy. So they can help people with pain or whatever problems just by touching them. And they usually don't talk about it. You have to ask patients specific about this kind of possibility. Usually very reluctant to share it with others as well. But they have the healing capacity as well.
Yeah.
Because they are becoming an instrument of the healing, the universal energy.
Yes, exactly. So they're just a conduit for the healing energy.
So most people with ND have this capacity as well. That you usually don't talk about it.
The life review often includes, in the life review, sometimes also includes previews of future occurrences. Can you describe that? I thought that was interesting. I had not come across that before.
Well, it's like you can have prognostic dreams during sleep. Because then the non-local realm, and there's the past and the future is available.
Exactly.
So in near-death experience, you can have future events as well, personal events, or also events of the world, of the planet. So you can perceive.
And those would be verifiable if they were written down, right? They would be.
And it happens. People have written down what they saw in the future for themselves or for the family, and then later they could rip it off everything what happens then later. So
check off the list.
Check off the list. Yeah.
Let's see. You mentioned in your book that people who report an NDE after attempting suicide say that they saw clearly that ending their life didn't solve the problem they wanted to escape from. cardiologist Sam Parnia, who wrote that book, Erasing Death. It was a very interesting book also. In his research, he found that people who were resuscitated after attempting suicide reported frightening NDEs. Have you found that? I didn't see that.
No.
You didn't state that in the part about suicide.
They have not too many studies done in after people who survive the suicide attempt, and usually they have a positive near-death experience. But it can happen that they have a frightening experience as well. I don't think it happens more often.
Parnia is also a cardiologist.
I know, it's a friend of mine. I know.
Oh, is he? Okay.
He's not a cardiologist, intensive care.
Oh, intensive care. Oh, okay. I see. I thought he was a cardiologist. Well, it wasn't in the book, but it was in an interview that he gave. I was reading the book, and then it was shortly after it came out, and then he was doing an interview on Fresh Air with Terry Gross on NPR, and he said that the patients who he resuscitated who had attempted suicide talked about a frightening, but I guess maybe what he heard as frightening was that realization that it didn't solve the problem that they thought was going to be solved. Right.
People who survived the suicide attempt have learned that they try to get rid of the problems, and you take the problems with you without the body, so you can solve them anymore.
Yeah.
So that's why people who survive a suicide attempt will never do it the second time, and they have used it in psychiatry hospitals for patients who are suicidal to let them read about NDEs and talk to people with an NDE, just to change the insight that suicide is not a solution.
Right. So people who experience an NDE who attempted suicide will realize that's not the answer. But people who did not experience an NDE, they may not come to that conclusion. They may try again, right?
No.
Yeah. So statistically, as you've reported, it's a minority of people who suffer cardiac arrest who actually remember having had an NDE. Have there been any studies done using hypnosis in helping people who remember? Is it a question of memory? Because in that same interview that I heard Sam Parnia talking, she asked him why, in his case, it was 23% at that time. And she asked him why only 23%. And his theory is that, or was at the time, that it's a question of memory. Like we don't always recall our dreams. And he said that the swelling in the brain may affect the memory of the near-death experience. And you're shaking your head, so I guess you agree.
My head.
Yeah.
So what we did in our longitudinal study to see if there's a transformation after having an NDE, and only patient with an NDE had this classical transformation. 82% did not have the transformation.
Right, but those were
and you don't have to remember the NDE to have the transformation. Children under the age of 5 usually don't remember the near-death experience, but they all have the transformation. They all have different. See chapter 5 of my book. So children are different. They have the enhanced intuitive sensitivity. They look for nature. They like classical music. They like silence. So they're different from other children as well. They usually get depressed when they're 60, 70 years old, but they don't remember the NDE. Although there are exceptions as well. Now, the question is why are there so many people who remember an NDE in our study? Well, what we saw, the mean age in our study was 62 years old. And we had to divide the patients older and younger than 6 years old and under the age of 60, more patients had an NDE. So the age seems to be important. And now there's one study done by Melvin Morse, prospective study in children who had an NDE after near drowning, traffic accident, infection of the brain, etc. And he found that 70% of those children had a near-death experience. 70%. And the retrospective studies done, usually to the 30, 40 years old patients who have traffic accidents, they mention about between 30 and 40% of those people have a near-death experience. In our study, with the mean age of 62, had only 18%, but the younger patients had more NDE as well. So the younger you are, the more near-death experience are reported. And that is why when you're young, under the age of 5, the connection between the brain and the consciousness is open. So young children are communicating with light beings, with people we don't see, etc. Because they are open, they have still easy access to the non-local consciousness. The older you are, more fixed the connection between the body and brain and consciousness will be. So everybody who dies will have a death experience. But when you have a cardiac arrest, you will be resuscitated within 5 to 10 minutes. And the older, more time you need to get out of your body and have the death experience. So when you resuscitate patients, only 18% report a near-death experience. But I'm quite sure that 100% have a death experience when they definitely die. We know from after-death communication that in the first days, weeks, or months after the death of a loved one, you will have communication with the consciousness of the deceased relative, which is in Europe about 125 million people have after-death communication, and in the Netherlands already 2 million, and in the United States many, many millions of people have the after-death communication, which means that consciousness is still there. Although they have died. So death is the end of our physical aspects. Death is the end of our body, but not the end of our consciousness. And reporting in the death experience is that when you come back, you have been out, but people who are old need more time. And that's my explanation.
So
at least there's an assumption.
Yeah. It seems that everyone should have a near-death experience if they die. It doesn't make sense to me.
They have a death experience.
Yeah, they have a death experience, but not a near-death, but not the tunnel, not the light, not the
When they die, they will have it.
Yeah, eventually they will.
Yeah, they will have it.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about terminal lucidity that you wrote about also in your book. I've always felt that these experiences assist the dying person, right? These terminal lucidity experiences assist the dying person in accepting death if they haven't already, right? And possibly...
That's what you talk about now is the end-of-life experiences.
Yes.
Visions. That's something else as terminal lucidity.
Yes. Oh,
you're talking.
Oh, yes. You're right. You're right. Yeah, the terminal lucidity is like an Alzheimer's patient suddenly.
We'll talk about it later, but
let's talk about terminal.
Dementia is the end-of-life experience of deathbed visions, and the people who are in the dying phase, the terminal phase of illness, get out of the body and meet their deceased relatives, deceased parents, deceased partner, deceased child, who come to get them. And they sometimes see beautiful colors, they see landscape, they see light, and then they're back in the body again. And there's a recent study done in Switzerland with someone who's working on a palliative terminal care, that about 80 to 90% of patients who are dying in the terminal phase, the last weeks or days, have this end-of-life experiences. which means that they are sometimes out of the body in the non-local realm as well. So that changed in that they lose the fear of death because of these experiences as well.
Yes.
What you mentioned before is the terminal lucidity or paradoxical lucidity. That's something else.
Yes. Sorry.
People in the end stage of Alzheimer who don't know anything anymore or just really in coma, don't recognize the family members for years, don't remember the names, they don't recognize who they are. And then just before they die, they set up, even if they've been in coma or unconscious for weeks or days, set up in the bed, look to the family members, call them by names, thank them, and die. And you know that the brain from end stage of Alzheimer, there's nothing left of brain function. So the non-local consciousness comes through at the end stage when they die.
Yes, it's beautiful. And in terms of the deathbed visions or deathbed experiences, I've always felt that it facilitates, that it's likely to facilitate a smoother transition, right?
That's what I said. They lose the fear of death because they don't.
Yes, they lose the fear of death. And so it seems to me that opting for physician-assisted suicide, while I don't judge anyone who does, but it might, I have always felt it might deprive the person of this comforting experience of, this kind of in and out of the body and experiencing some facets of this other dimension would be so comforting, and that is denied them if they decide to terminate their life.
It's a natural death.
Yeah,
it's a natural death. I mean, I am convinced that the moment that you will die is somewhere above fixed. That's why you can, when you have an intuition, you can see someone will die in 3 weeks and he die in 3 weeks because it's fixed already, the date of your death. When you have a natural death, you didn't live your life full and you didn't get the chance to make everything right, to fix problems, whatever, the unfinished business, etc. So I think it's important to live your life until the end, until the natural death, whatever it may be.
Yeah, it's not a moral judgment. It's more of a practical judgment, right? Or a practical perspective, that I know my mother.
People are free to make a choice.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it will be a right choice as well.
Right, yeah. There are advanced systems in place that are used commonly in Southeast Asia and Japan, South Korea, where they actually take a person who's been found dead, effectively brought to the emergency room, attach them to a type of bypass machine that takes the blood out of the body, provides oxygen into it, and then circulates it and pumps it around the body again. And that way they give the doctors a number of hours of time to try to figure out what caused the person's death and try to fix the underlying problem, if it can be fixed, before restarting the heart and bringing the person back to life again. Is that something that is done in other places? And I mean, I hadn't heard about that. I had heard about cooling the body to prevent the organs from dying so quickly.
The brain.
That's the brain especially.
Hypothermia is done for the brain. People have complicated CPR, they will cool the brain especially, but also sometimes cool the body by artificial circulation.
Yes.
Will brood in, and it will happen also in the US, I think. But the question is it ethical? The problem is that we can do a lot of technical things in medicine, but we forget to ask the question, is it useful? Is it ethical, useful as well? And I think the ethics are 30 years behind what we can technically do. And we have to discuss again and again, is it right to do this treatment, to do this possibility, etc. I'm reluctant to these kind of treatments as well.
So are you saying that the question of ethics, is it because the person might be resuscitated and be, brain damaged, or is it?
They are already brain damaged.
I see.
They have already brain damage. But also think, let us say, the end stage of cancer, where you have to start chemotherapy again and give whatever kind of therapies to get the people 3 weeks or 4 weeks more life, or is it about the quality of life and don't give that's an ethical problem.
Right.
Not an ethical problem. And that's what I mean as well. So you get the people, keep them alive, but is it good for the people?
Yeah. Oh, I agree.
It's about, for me, it's the quality of life and not how much longer or weeks or months you will live, but with the whole quality of life as well. We have to discuss in each patient if it's useful, what are the positive aspects and the negative aspects.
What are your thoughts on transhumanism?
I don't know.
The idea of enhancing the brain and, the person through technology, through implants and, AI type things.
I don't believe it.
You don't believe it can be done?
I don't think it's the ethical problem as well.
Yeah.
I don't know what will be the result, and I should never do it.
I think it's
not the future.
It's not denying our. Sorry, go ahead.
It's not the future for humanity, these kind of things.
Yeah. I think it's a denial of our potential.
The essence of
as humans, right? Yeah. It's denying the non-local possibilities of learning and evolving to be able to access the non-local consciousness. It's even denying the non-local consciousness if you need technology to, I don't know. I don't like it myself.
I don't believe it.
Yeah. Which doesn't mean they won't try. Right?
No, I shouldn't try it as well.
Yeah.
I think there are so many aspects in the world now, let's say hunger, let's say disease, let's go to Africa. There's a lot of things that can be resolved, and it is not important what we're talking about now, transhumanism.
Yeah.
For me, it's a kind of nonsense. Give chance to other creatures that they can live better than now.
Right. So what questions are you asking in your current research on mind-brain interaction?
Well, I've asked all the questions already. And what I'm doing now is to share my insight with others as well. When you go to my website, you can see all the scientific articles. You can download them for free as well. You get a lot of interviews, YouTube interviews, where I can talk about my insight. And I hope that a lot of people, younger generation, don't read books anymore, but they look for internet. And that's the way I try to help the people to change the insight in the mind-brain relationship based on the death experiences.
Yes, and the article that you sent me, which I read yesterday.
That was the Bigelow article.
That was it's like a condensed version of the book.
It's an updated version. It's updated as well.
Well, I think I'm going to open it up for questions. If anyone has a question or a comment, just Lorraine, you have one, not ready. Okay. So let's make sure you're unmuted. Can you? There you go. Okay.
Yeah. Actually, I probably have like a dozen questions. So I think I love this topic. I've had experiences, which is why I've spent so many years following this discipline, this experience. And I have not read your book, your literature, so forgive me if I ask a question that you've already answered. Does consciousness have density in the sense of, and I'm asking again based on my own experiences, which I'm trying to understand, is it possible to have an area, an aspect, a region of consciousness that has greater density, greater ability to be perceived than other areas? Does that question make some sense to you?
I don't use the word density, but I know that consciousness can give energy.
Is consciousness vibration? Is it light?
No. It can give light, but it is not light itself.
Okay.
It's love. Unconditional love and acceptance. That's consciousness as a basic principle.
And how far does it extend into existence? And I actually mean somewhat geographically.
It's fundamental in the universe. Everything comes from consciousness. Even plants, animals, the planet Earth, the universe itself, you and me, everything comes from consciousness. It's the basis. It's fundamental together with energy and information.
And is there something beyond the universe?
No, it's the start of everything.
It's fundamental.
That means it's fundamental.
Mm-hmm.
Let me let other people ask questions. But
okay,
sure I have more, but I'm going to be quiet.
Okay, you take turns. Thank you. I appreciate that. Bernard, you have a question.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. van Lommel, for your presentation. Lots of questions, of course, can be raised. I have one question for you, which has bothered me a great deal. How do we define death? Why do we know that someone is dead? I mean, in the old days, it was no breathing, no activity whatsoever. Then people realized that, if I put some electrical probes on somebody's head, that person is still alive, whatever we define it, an hour later, 10 minutes later, 9 minutes later. How do we know that someone is dead? How do we define death? The same way as how do we define birth? It's an open-ended question. And the second question I have is...
Well, first, let's answer your first question. That's better. Death is the end of our physical aspects, and it is irreversible. Let's say when you're clinical death, that is where you have a cardiac arrest, there's a possibility to resuscitate patients within the first 5 to 10 minutes. And when you're later, people will die always because of irreversible damage of the brain function. So it's irreversible. But death is just the end of our body and not the end of our consciousness. That's what I always call it, the continuity of consciousness. I never talk about life after death because life is a biological system, and biological system, our body has died, doesn't function anymore. So it's the continuity of consciousness.
Thank you so much. And a very quick question. You talked about the skepticism of Western scientists about consciousness. What about the non-Western science? What can we learn from non-Western traditions about death and consciousness?
They knew already for years, for thousands of years, that consciousness is eternal. But also Plato has written about it. Plato has said the body is the temporary carrier of the eternal soul. But also in Hinduism, the Upanishads, the Vedas, the Buddhisms, anthroposophy, the cognitive Judaism, the Kabbalah, But also the original people living on Earth knew always that death is not the end of your consciousness. We got lost in the last 300 years of this insight and knowledge, but it has been known always, always.
Mm-hmm. I have a question in the chat from Carrie. She says, thank you for your work on NDE and consciousness beyond life. Have you followed Dr. Larry Dossey's work on non-local healing? What do you think of it? And how do we get more conventional?
He's a wonderful man, but he had a stroke 2 years ago.
Oh, did he?
Oh, yes, awful. But I know he's a good friend of mine. I've met him several times on conferences. And what we do, I called it already and mentioned it in non-local healing, is that
we did talk
there's a real effect. The intention of the healer has effect on the distance on the patients who are sitting there. So it's a real effect which you can objectify by, let's say, by EEG measurements as well, and not only in subjective changes.
Mm-hmm. And she says, how do we get more conventional medical practitioners to embrace non-local healing other than changing research paradigms, like adding subjectively to material science?
I think the first thing is to change the definition of science. Science is not just material science, but science has to include subjectivity and have to expand into what we call the post-material science. And then you can accept non-local healing, you can accept non-local perception, you can accept all this non-local information exchange because it is normal. Nothing paranormal at all.
Mm-hmm. Right. And nothing supernatural.
No, that's not supernatural at all.
It's all natural. It's all natural.
But you need a different kind of theory about it, and that's what we're talking about.
Yes, yes. Lorraine, you have another question.
Let me find the right button here. You spoke, and you're speaking about children up to 5 years of age, how that they are less able to experience NDEs, and yet I've read at least one book on children up to 5 years of age who are, how would I say, they are able to remember prior lives. Mm-hmm. I have a particular book on post-World War II children who are able to, and again, up to roughly 5 years of age, who are able to recount with unbelievable specificity their experience of living somebody's life who died in World War II.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what I mentioned is that under the age of 5, they don't remember the NDE experience, but they had the experience and have the transformation. That's what I mentioned. The other thing is that because they are so open, what I mentioned as well, that under the age of 5, the children have connection with the non-local realm, that they can have memory from another life as well. So the reincarnation studies have been done by IANDS and now by Jim Tucker as well.
Yes, we've had Jim Tucker.
Impressive stories that you but Ian Stevens always said there's no scientific proof of it. It's beyond reasonable doubt that reincarnation exists. But it also, again, in all history, in the Hindu, Buddhism, and in the original people of the world have known that this is possible. Nothing new, but we have to reinvent it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We've had Jim Tucker, and some of the accounts are really amazing. Yeah. One of my favorites was a little boy in the United States, and most of the stories are not in the United States. Because
what's the bomber?
Oh, not that one. Not that one. That one is very well known, and it's been written about. And
but I know.
There's another one who his mother, her father died, And about 18 months later, she gave birth to a son. And her father was a policeman in Manhattan who died. He was shot in the back trying to prevent a robbery. And the bullet entered the back and exited through the chest and went through his pulmonary valve. And when the boy was born, he had a small cylindrical birthmark corresponding to the entry wound of the bullet, and a more jagged one on his chest corresponding to the exit wound. And he had to have surgery to correct his pulmonary valve, or because it wasn't working.
And Stevenson had written about 40 cases of biological markers at birth.
Yes.
Traumatic, and usually the spontaneous memory of a previous life is because they were murdered or
yes.
somebody who died. It's never a natural death.
Right. Yeah, he told me that it was about 70% died violently, either through natural causes like an earthquake or something, or through violence. Yeah. But so this little boy, when he was about 2.5 years old, he was misbehaving, and his mother got exasperated because he wouldn't listen. And she said, "If you don't listen to me, I'm going to have to spank you." And he said, "When you were a little girl, you misbehaved and I never spanked you." And she said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "I was your daddy. Don't you remember?" And he started to, a lot of details. Like, do you remember you had a kitten and you named him Boston and I called him Boss, and, all these things. And so eventually they contacted Jim Tucker. And he came to investigate, and they showed the little boy a picture of his grandfather when he was a little boy in grade school. It was a class picture, so that was filled with children, and the little boy pointed right to his grandfather and said, "That's me right there." I
know all those cases, and they're all very convincing.
Yeah. So I'm saying, I'm for the sake of anyone who has a question about that. And yeah, it's very interesting. And I think that the fact that they died violently for the most part ties into the fact that they remember, because they tend to reincarnate much faster.
Exactly.
Yeah. They don't cross over all the way sometimes. Lorraine, did you have another question?
Oh, I've got a dozen, but I'll try not take the whole time and let it. So when other people have questions, please just interrupt me. Have you, the people with whom you've worked, have the experience of their sort of the electricity in their body changing?
Yes.
So they have
the lamps, bulbs go out, computer stops functioning. They don't start the motor of the bike, of the car, but especially when they're emotional. When they are emotional, they're disturbing the electromagnetic field around them, and it happens quite a lot. But also, it's just you have to ask for it. They are very reluctant to share it with others.
I'm sorry, the last part
They're
again.
very reluctant to share it with others, but it happens.
Reluctant.
Absolutely.
When they walk outside in the dark, all the lights go off when they walk by, etc. So.
Yeah.
I was going to say, that's been my experience, and I never, ever talked about it because it felt too weird.
But I mentioned it in my book as well.
Very, very isolated.
All on my book.
I look forward to it. And then, I don't know if it changes the pH of the blood, but I want to talk about remote healing. So what I've been doing in the last roughly year and a half, and this is very new to me, but I'm very interested, looking at alternative energy healing, looking at disciplines like radionics for remote healing. And some people have had unbelievable success with that. And there are people in Egypt and France and other places who are also working with biogeometry. And I'm not quite sure how that works with out-of-body experiences and post-death experiences, but it's all applications of studies into energy. So definitely not traditional medical school training, research, protocols, and so on. I didn't know if you have any familiarity in particular with radionics, which is working subtle energy.
I don't know about it, but I know that distant healing can be very effective as well. Mm-hmm. That's the only thing I know.
Mm-hmm. We have so many faculties that we don't realize we have, you know? It's always impressed me. We've had a lot of, when I had the center, we had a lot of workshops on remote viewing, and people were always amazed with no training whatsoever, you know, just a 45-minute training on here's the protocol, right? And never having done this and being given a target and being able to see and describe the target, you know, and they say, how can I have done that? That doesn't make sense to me, you know? And I mean, the CIA spent years, you know, studying remote viewing and having, you know, training people and
I know it all, and I know Steve Schwartz very well. He has written books about it. He's a good friend of mine, and I know, so I write about it in my book as well. Yeah. So it's what I don't use the word remote. I call it non-local perception. It is beyond time and beyond space, instantaneous, not by your senses or not by your body. Mm-hmm. So I tried to mention it in a scientific approach, non-local perception.
Yeah.
And that's what also Stephen Schwartz calls it as well.
Yeah. But I see that as just one example of the faculties that we have that are relating, that are dependent, I guess, on connecting with our non-local consciousness.
You and get that we access to your non-local consciousness. And that's
exactly. Things like mediumship, things like, you know, all kinds of things.
Open yourself, you change your threshold of consciousness.
Yeah, yeah. But we don't know it, so we consider it supernatural, or we consider it paranormal, right? Yeah. Anyone else have a question? No? Surprised. Lorraine, we can count on you.
Well, I'm so interested in this. So thanks to Rene Descartes and, you know, the scientific protocols and all the things that have developed with experiments and big pharma and all that. Yeah, our ability to relate to ourselves and to the natural world has been, to me, really distorted and very much minimized, which is, to me, highly regrettable. And there are, thankfully, lots of people working to continue that and to bring it back and to expand it. And so my question is, so if, actually, it's not if. So in one of my experiences, I did encounter an entity. And it had no form other than sort of pure energy and complete love, which there are no words to describe it. Is there a way I can find that again without dying?
It's always possible.
Because what everybody
can ask for it. You can pray for it, but you cannot ask for it.
Yeah.
As soon as you need it.
You can't make it happen, but it can happen, right? Exactly. Kabir, the Sufi poet Kabir, said, once in my life for 15 seconds, I experienced reality, and the rest of my life has been lived in service to that moment. Okay, so I think one of the things he was pointing out is that you don't have to have it over and over. Once gives you so much information, wakes you up, you know, to this other dimension. And and we want to try to capture it again. But it's not about capturing it again. It's always there. We just have to find, you know, the access in a sense, you know, but when we think of it as something, something that we can get, then we've objectified it, and then we're back in this left brain kind of trance, right? But through meditation, you know, we can access those states sometimes, but it's not, you can't make it happen.
It's a possibility, but you never start to meditate to get this kind of experiences.
Mm-hmm.
It may happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a purpose for meditation.
No, it's not a purpose for meditation. I agree. Yeah, phenomena should never be the goal.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Pim van Lommel, for having spent this time with us and sharing your expertise and your wisdom. And thank you all for attending. And we'll see you next time.
You're welcome.
Okay.
I wish you all the best.
Thank you.